Beginning this Monday on One, The Secret Diary of a Spy.
What would someone with no apparent personal life find to write in a diary?
You don't know what you're doing. Give it to me now.
And miss out on your secret life?
You were mentioned at dinner last night. The message to the future.
Just at this moment, I feel like murdering her.
Secrets, lies and deceit lead to murder in the chilling two-part wartime drama Never Come Back, starting Monday at 9:30 on One.
Radio Times. Christmas just isn't the same without it.
Arena's Food Night is continuing on BBC Two, and in 10 minutes pays homage to that nutritious but sometimes underestimated vegetable, the potato. Here on One, in 20 minutes, there's festive show-jumping action from the Grand Hall Olympia. Now, at 5 to 10, the main news of the evening with Martyn Lewis.
Jacques Delors warns of a political crisis if John Major tries to derail plans for a single European currency. But Mr. Major and the other EC leaders agree a menu for negotiations, and Italy says all of them are sitting down at the table. And Saddam Hussein calls off the Washington peace talks, insisting that the Palestinian question must be top of any agenda. Good evening. European leaders ended their summit in Rome by agreeing a blueprint for the negotiations that will shape the community's future. The Prime Minister, John Major, explained it like this. We have a menu. Britain's favourite dishes are on that menu. So are others' favourite dishes. But the community has not yet decided what orders to place. But as Mr. Major flew back home, the EC President, Jacques Delors, warned him against trying to derail plans for a single currency and central bank for Europe.
This summit didn't reach any conclusions on the future shape of Europe, and that's why the Prime Minister was able to say he was very satisfied. He wants to lower the temperature on an issue which could divide the Conservatives in the run-up to the next election. Mr. Major says the intergovernmental talks which opened formally today could take more than a year to reach decisions. They'll consider a whole series of proposals which would drastically cut the powers of national parliaments. But at a news conference, Mr. Major insisted the agenda was a menu, not a mandate. And he warned that the government might be prepared to use their veto to block the changes.
We are discussing them, of course, bearing in mind that the outcome of the Intergovernmental Conference is one that has to be determined by unanimity.
Afterwards, Mr. Major dismissed the view that a federal Europe was being proposed, and he's convinced that Britain won't be left behind.
Well, if by a federal Europe you mean, as most people tend to assume, a centralised government, a federalised, centralised government, there is no question of a federal Europe. And I don't actually believe that's what any of our partners in Europe are actually aiming for.
But do you accept that if the other countries want to go ahead at a faster rate than Britain, they could do that? There could be a two-speed Europe which you could not stop.
Nobody in Europe wants a two-speed Europe. I know of no European minister at any level who wants a two-speed Europe. The general view is that the community has got to evolve together. And it is very important that it evolves together because it isn't a closed door. More countries will join the community. And you simply could not go ahead in the sort of capacity where people moved at different speeds. It would dissolve into chaos over a period.
So a relieved Mr. Major ended the summit, thankful that this time a confrontation had been avoided. But even as he was leaving, a dispute broke out over Britain's role. The President of the European Commission, Jacques Delors, suggested there would be a political crisis if Mr. Major didn't accept the goal of a single currency.
If we have to provoke a political crisis, one will be provoked.
He wouldn't elaborate at this news conference, nor later when tackled by reporters.
It's a general appreciation.
What do you mean by a political crisis?
If we cannot succeed.
The Chancellor, Norman Lamont, did his best to play down the dispute.
Everybody is looking for a solution that will satisfy everybody's objectives. There was a very good atmosphere, and I had a very good talk with Mr. Delors just on the way out, so I'm very happy.
While the summit was in session, a truce was established, but the real battle over the future of Europe and the extent to which Britain should be involved may only just have started. John Sargent, BBC News, Rome.
Our economics editor, Peter Jay, has been in Rome for the European summit. A few minutes ago, I asked him about the significance of Jacques Delors' intervention.
Well, I think it's a sharp reminder of the limitations of a foreign policy based exclusively on the avoidance of rows. Mr. Delors made it crystal clear that unless Britain accepts the goal of a single currency, there will be a political crisis, and indeed he strongly implied he will make the political crisis. The Prime Minister has said clearly that he's going very shortly to publish his rival treaty amendment text for economic and monetary union. That will not, I'm sure, include a commitment to a single currency, even as an ultimate goal. And if it did, of course, it would be a huge U-turn, and one can imagine the Member of Parliament for Finchley being on her feet making some comments.
So where do we go from here? Are you saying that Mr. Major has only postponed the inevitable confrontation?
Well, we go to the further meetings of the Intergovernment Conference on Economic and Monetary Union, which the next session is in January, and it goes on monthly. However, that conference can't proceed if the basic goal is in question. And it would seem to me that at the January meeting, if the British position is that we cannot accept as a commitment the goal of a single currency, there is going to be the political crisis which Mr. Delors has promised us. And there's no doubt that the great majority of community countries support him. They've been prepared to make a temporary halt of the European train for Mr. Major to climb on board. But if Mr. Major doesn't want to travel in the direction they want to go, then indeed there's going to be exactly the same problem there was before under Mrs. Thatcher, even if the tone of voice is different.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. European community leaders also agreed to end the community's ban on new investments in South Africa. But in Johannesburg, the ANC National Conference has passed a resolution supporting the continuation of strict sanctions against South Africa. It was passed despite an appeal from the ANC President, Oliver Tambo, who called yesterday for sanctions to be reassessed. Saddam Hussein says he won't allow the United States to dictate a timetable for talks on the Gulf crisis. Iraq's Foreign Minister, Tariq Aziz, was due to leave for Washington today. Baghdad says his meeting with President Bush is cancelled.
As Iraqi television tonight showed pictures of Saddam Hussein greeting a Libyan-based Muslim group, it became clear that he was planning to send a carefully balanced message to the United States in his speech. Iraq was, he told them, ready either to show political flexibility in accepting reconciliation or to take a tough line in order to achieve its national goals. But rather than give up those goals or allow its enemies to win, Iraq was prepared to wade in blood up to the chest, as he put it. And the conditions he set out for a settlement for the crisis included the return of Jerusalem to the Arabs. But the new hint of flexibility has come too late for his foreign minister, Tariq Aziz, to be able to fly to Washington on Monday for the first round of talks with the United States.
No talks at the moment.
And any date, any idea when they might start again?
There is no idea now, and we will make announce this day from the foreign ministry.
With so much at stake, it seems a small thing to disagree about.
I agree with you. It is a small point. If you want to make a dialogue with me, you must be Kareem.
Generous.
Generous.
Flexible.
Again, the hint of flexibility, though there it's the Americans who are expected to be flexible. So Iraq is playing it both ways. Its television service is preparing people for war, but there are these hints now that peace is possible. Iraq is determined not to seem to be pushed around by Washington, hence all this complicated maneuvering. But if that fails, the cost will be high. John Simpson, BBC News, Baghdad.
The president of Albania has blamed criminals and hooligans for the violent anti-government protests of the last 2 days. Troops backed up by tanks are now in control of 4 main trouble spots where there was widespread looting and vandalism. The capital, Tirana, is calm, but troops are guarding the television station.
News of the violent uprisings has been widely reported on Albanian television, although state-controlled broadcasts have stuck rigidly to official lines that hooligans and enemies of the state were responsible. President Ramiz Alia has been seen on television telling regional communist officials that the riots will only hinder moves to democracy. They in turn pledge their loyalty to him. But that loyalty has been seriously questioned in cities like Skoda, where the scars of 2 days of rioting are clearly visible. The demonstrations have also prompted a characteristically hard line from the government. Tanks have been much in evidence on the streets, and extra troops have been drafted in to stop further violence. This evening, a state of uneasy peace exists in most of the country. The violence in Albania has been ignited by those calling for an immediate end to old Stalinist policies, which have been both harsh and an economic failure. The demonstrators have been unimpressed with concessions made earlier this week, which saw the setting up of the first non-communist political party in 45 years. President Alia has promised a meeting with the New Democratic Party, but all efforts so far have failed. He's also promised elections in February, but after years of systematic repression, the people of Albania may not be prepared to wait that long.
Our apologies for the picture quality on parts of that report. Here, relatives and friends of Albanians have been able to get through to the country on the telephone. They say the situation is quieter, but still worrying.
In this tiny London shop, evidence of a country slowly emerging from the iron grip of communist rule 5 years after the death of the hardline Stalinist Enver Hoxha. Inside, books and crafts from a people proud of their nation and culture. Though few live in Britain, they're watching events closely.
By and large, they welcome the changes over the last year. I mean, Ramiz Alia has done everything I think he possibly can. Multi-party elections, changing the economy, allowing religion. But the events of the last few days, I think they're a bit worried.
Contact with friends and relatives in Albania is easier now. All's quiet, they say, though tapped telephones mean reports can be guarded.
I was speaking to my friend in Tirana, and he says that it's gone much quieter now. People are more peaceful. And also he had friends in Shkodra and Elbasan, and they'd said it was quietened down now.
Academics say Albania's communist leaders have controlled the revolution so far.
I think there will be a trend towards democracy. Whether it will work or not, I don't know. But I would imagine the first stage would be a kind of coalition government in which Alia is still the president, but he shares power with people who are not communists.
President Ramiz Alia remains popular, even among students and intellectuals. He's likely to survive politically, but Albania has no history of democracy, and impatience at the speed of change may yet lead to catastrophe.
A former policeman has been convicted at the Old Bailey of blackmailing food manufacturers, including Heinz and Pedigree Pet Foods. But he was cleared of contaminating baby food and a tin of Heinz soup with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. He denied all the charges.
For 18 months, glass, caustic soda and razor blades were found in baby food. In anonymous letters to Heinz and other food companies, Rodney Wicello demanded almost £4 million to prevent their products being contaminated. The police arranged to have some of the money paid into 2 building society accounts set up by Wicello 4 years ago under a false name and address. Wicello travelled nationwide withdrawing the money from cash machines. Detectives realised the blackmailer understood their procedures, so they made him think they weren't watching the cash points.
Because he thought we weren't pursuing him in that direction, his pattern of withdrawals reduced, and we were finally able to target building societies, and on the 20th he turned up at one of the ones we were watching.
At the end of the 10-week Old Bailey trial, the jury spent 3 days deliberating. By a majority of 10-2, they found Rodney Wicello guilty on charges of blackmail, pet food contamination, attempting to obtain property by deception, and a threat to kill. He was acquitted on 4 counts of contaminating baby food with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. He'll be sentenced on Monday.
Asil Nadir, the chairman of the fruit and electronics giant Polypec, has been arrested. He was met by serious fraud officers at Heathrow Airport as he got off a flight from Turkey. Mr. Nadir, whose trading empire collapsed 3 months ago, has personal debts estimated at £40 million. He's being questioned at Holborn Police Station in central London. Now sport, with news of another defeat for England's cricketers and the rest of the action. Here's Rob Bonnet.
The England cricket captain Graham Gooch has called for an urgent improvement by his team in every department of the game, following yet another one-day failure in Australia. He said England were going backwards after an 8-wicket defeat by New Zealand in Brisbane. The scores: England 203 for 6, New Zealand 204 for 2.
England's infuriating capacity for self-destruction still follows them like a shadow. With both Gooch and Smith showing encouraging signs of finding elusive form, the promise was there of a second morale-boosting win in the space of 3 days. Until, on 48, Gooch introduced Brisbane to something straight from the English village green. The shot epitomised English carelessness and set the tone for much that followed, most notably